Hi, welcome to Why Bayes' Theorem is Important, Part 3a. So this is the third part in a three-part series on the role of Bayes' theorem in drawing conclusions from experimental data. In parts 1 and 2, we considered cases where we wanted to use experimental data to discriminate between exactly two hypotheses. We saw how we could use Bayes' theorem to translate an experimental result into probabilities for the validity of each of the two hypotheses. Now we're going to consider a scenario that is much closer to a typical scientific experiment. Here we don't have just two hypotheses that we're trying to discriminate between. Instead, let's say we measure some parameter, like the mass of a particle or the distance to a galaxy. We get a measured value and its uncertainty. Our question here is the following. What do the measured value and its uncertainty tell us about the true value of the parameter? For example, let's say the distance to a star is measured to be 42,000 plus or minus 2,000 light years away. What does this tell us about the true value of the distance to the star? What is the probability that it is exactly 42,000 light years? And what is the probability that it's between 40,000 and 44,000 light years? So this question is not nearly as straightforward as it may first appear. In part 2, we looked at a case of measuring the decay rate from a radioactive sample to figure out which of two known samples it was, sample 1 or sample 2. The goal was to assign probabilities, given the results of the measurement, to the hypotheses that it was sample 1 or sample 2. To do this, we needed to assume initial probabilities, called priors, for the two hypotheses, evaluated without taking into account the result of the measurement, or equivalently assigned prior to the measurement. We saw that the choice of prior affected the final probabilities assigned to the two hypotheses. However, if we had small measurement uncertainties, we could be very certain of which sample we had, regardless of which prior we used. Here, in part 3, we will again look at measuring the decay rate from a radioactive sample. But this time we won't be trying to decide just between two hypotheses. Instead, we'll be seeing what the measured value of the decay rate, along with its uncertainty, says about the probability that the true value of the decay rate falls in some range. Like we saw in part 2, we will find that in order to make such statements, we must adopt a set of priors. The chosen prior will affect the result we get, but its effects can be mitigated if the measurement uncertainties are small. Now, part 3 is a bit longer than part 1 and part 2, so we've broken it into two videos, part 3a and part 3b. Here in part 3a, we'll set up the scenario and discuss issues that are going to arise. We'll save the mathematical details of the derivation for part 3b. Now, this video will lean heavily on part 2 of this series. In particular, we'll be referencing details from that video. So if you haven't watched that yet, we recommend that you do before proceeding here. Strictly speaking, you don't necessarily need part 1 to understand what's going on here, but it might help. Our example here will be of a measurement whose primary uncertainty is taken to be statistical, this uncertainty will be approximately Gaussian distributed. Now, measurement uncertainties are not always Gaussian. However, they are often approximately Gaussian, and this is a common assumption. Our statements here will also apply more generally to the case of Gaussian uncertainties, whether or not those uncertainties are statistical in nature. So this video assumes knowledge of the Poisson and Gaussian distributions at the same level as in Part 2. Background on these can be found in the Gaussian statistics playlist and in the Poisson statistics playlist. Additionally, if you're not familiar with Gaussian measurement uncertainties, we'd recommend the videos Random Walk with a Varying Step Size, Qualitative Discussion, and Introduction to Gaussian Error Bars. Okay, let's get started. So we'll return to the scenario explored in Part 2. You work in a museum that has an exhibit that counts the decays from an inserted radioactive sample. Another museum employee has found an old radioactive sample in a storeroom. It has lost its label. It's definitely not one of the two known samples considered in Part 2. None of the employees knows anything about it, and any records the museum had about it have been lost. Now you want to know the rate at which the apparatus in the exhibit will register decays from this sample. So you put the sample in the apparatus and wait 10 minutes. That's 600 seconds. The apparatus counts 2,553 decays. Now we should note that one would normally probably convert this to 2553 divided by 600 seconds, which equals 4.255 decays per second. But for simplicity, we'll keep this in terms of the number of decays in a 10-minute interval. However, we know that this result of 2,553 decays in 10 minutes is not infinitely precise. It has an error bar. In particular, it has statistical error because radioactive decay follows a Poisson distribution, which implies a degree of randomness in the result. We should note that we're assuming that the statistical uncertainty resulting from Poisson statistics is the only important uncertainty in this problem. In a more realistic scenario, there would also be other sources of uncertainty, but we're going to assume these are small and can be ignored. Now, for a Poisson distributed process with expected number of events lambda, the probability to actually observe m events is given by the Poisson distribution. So the Poisson probability to observe m events when lambda are expected is equal to lambda to the m over m factorial times e to the minus lambda. However, for the case where lambda is large and m is not too different from lambda, this approaches a Gaussian distribution, shown in the second line on this slide. So we will use this latter form. So, as we said, the Poisson probability to observe m events when lambda are expected approaches a Gaussian form, so let's briefly look at what that means. A Gaussian distribution, also called a normal distribution, has the form shown here. It has two parameters, mu and sigma. A Gaussian function is a symmetric bell-shaped curve which peaks at mu. The parameter sigma is its standard deviation, and this controls its width. So shown here on the right is a Gaussian with mu equal to 0 and sigma equal to 1. So the probability of observing exactly m events when lambda are expected on average is well described by a Gaussian that has mu set equal to lambda and the standard deviation sigma set equal to the square root of lambda. As the observed value m is Gaussian distributed around the true value lambda, this is an example of a measurement with a Gaussian distributed uncertainty. The standard deviation sigma of the Gaussian, here equal to the square root of lambda, is often what is quoted as the measurement uncertainty, and that's what we'll do here. As the best estimate we have for lambda is the observed m equals 2553, the measured value of lambda would be quoted as 2553 plus or minus 51, where the 51 is approximately equal to the square root of 2553. Okay, so your measured value of lambda is 2553 plus or minus 51. Note that while we are quoting the standard deviation of the Gaussian uncertainty as our error bar, this is not universal. For example, some works quote a 90% or 95% confidence interval, which we won't go into here. But it's important to pay attention to the definition of the error bar used for any particular reported result. So what does the measured value, 2553 plus or minus 51, tell us about the true number, lambda, of decays expected in 10 minutes? For example, what does it tell us about the hypothesis that the true value of lambda is 2553? And what does it tell us about alternative hypotheses, like that the true value of lambda is 2500, or that lambda is equal to 2600, or that lambda is equal to 592, or that lambda is equal to 300,000? In our previous examples in Part 1 and Part 2, we used Bayes' theorem to assign probabilities to hypotheses after taking some data. Let's see what happens if we try that here. What happens if we try to calculate the probability of the hypothesis lambda equals 2500, given that m is equal to 2553? So we write that as the probability of lambda equals 2500 given m equals 2553. Okay, so Bayes' theorem says the following. The probability of A given B is equal to the probability of B given A times the probability of A divided by the probability of B. Here we want the probability that lambda equals 2500 given that m equals 2553, so we'll substitute lambda equals 2500 for A and substitute m equals 2553 for B. So our equation becomes the following. The probability that lambda equals 2500 given that m equals 2553 is equal to the probability that m equals 2553 given that lambda equals 2500 times the probability that lambda equals 2500 divided by the probability that m equals 2553. Okay, so we have that same equation from the previous slide. The thing we want to know is on the left-hand side. We need to get each of the factors that are on the right-hand side. Let's start by looking at the probability that lambda equals 2500. Now, the probability that lambda equals 2500 is the probability that lambda equals 2500 evaluated with no information of m. One could look at the probability that lambda equals 2500 as the probability one would assign to the hypothesis lambda equals 2500 before the measurement. It is a prior probability. In part 2, we saw we needed to make some starting assumption about prior probabilities to use Bayes' theorem, and that these priors affect our final results. The same is true here. So, what value do we assign to the probability that lambda equals 2500? If we think about this, we immediately run into issues. In the examples in part 1 and part 2, we had to assign starting probabilities to two hypotheses. In part 1, the two hypotheses were 1, you were holding container 1, and 2, you were holding container 2. In part 2, the two hypotheses were 1, you had radioactive sample 1, and 2, you had radioactive sample 2. So, how many competing hypotheses do we have here? Here we don't know very much about lambda at all. Lambda could be 2500, or 2000, or 10,000, or 30. Even if we only entertain possible values near the measured value of m equals 2553, we still have loads of hypotheses. So, lambda equals 2500, lambda equals 2500.1, lambda equals 2500.01, and lambda equals 2500.000000001 are all separate hypotheses. So we have an infinite number of hypotheses. If we have an infinite number of hypotheses, the best guess for the probability of any particular hypothesis, like the probability that lambda is equal to 2500, is 0. So it looks like we need to go back to the drawing board. Now, while we can't assign a reasonable value to the probability that lambda equals 2500, we can do something pretty close. What if we instead ask for example, the probability that lambda is between 2500 and 2501? Let's start over considering this range of lambda for our hypothesis instead. Okay, so now our Bayes' theorem equation reads as follows. The probability that lambda is between 2500 and 2501, given that m equals 2553, is equal to the probability that m would equal 2553, given that lambda was between 2500 and 2501, times the probability that lambda is between 2500 and 2501, divided by the probability that m would equal 2553. Now this will be an equation we can work with. We still have to come up with a value for the prior probability, the probability that lambda is between 2500 and 2501, but we'll work on evaluating this and the rest of the right-hand side of this equation in part 3b. Okay, so now let's summarize part A. At this point, we've set up our scenario and seen that we ran into problems trying to evaluate the hypothesis that lambda was equal to 2500. We've decided to look instead at a revised hypothesis that lambda is between 2500 and 2501. In part 3b, we'll work through the details of Bayes' theorem with our revised hypothesis and see how the answer works out.